This video lesson is for the grade 11 English home language students of St. Patrick's CBC in Kimberley, South Africa. It's made for them to discuss the September exams which they wrote earlier this year. I have used the lesson plans which you receive on Edmodo to make these slides. So this is the work for the first week of term 4 from the 6th to the 9th of October. You will have 3 lessons this week, 2 to go over the papers and 1 to write a formal letter assessment which has to be completed and handed in on Turnitin by 5 p.m. on Friday the 9th of October. By now you should all have subscribed to the Mrs. M Teaches English YouTube channel so that you can get hold of all of the video lesson materials whenever you need them. As always, the lesson plan starts with the objectives for the week, so by the end of this week you should have gone over all of your answers to both paper 1 and paper 2. To do this, you need the marked answer scripts, which you should have collected from school in the brown envelopes. You should also have the question papers for both paper 1 and paper 2. You were instructed to keep these after writing the exams. If you have misplaced your copies, the soft copies are still available for you on Edmodo. You will have to download and print them yourselves. The marking guidelines for paper 1 have been attached to the same post as these lesson plans, so please have a look at those. I don't think you need to print them. As long as you can read them on the screen, that'll be fine. And then your SAGS document, the subject and assessment guidelines provided by the IEB, contain the rubrics that are used to mark your paper 2. And you need to be able to look at those as well. That's available on Edmodo. I posted that for you at the beginning of the year. In the first lesson, you need to go over your answers to paper 1. Pay attention to question 1, the comprehension. Have a look at how you did and see whether you actually understood the passage. I find that many of you don't read carefully in an exam situation and you're unable to identify the nuances in the writing. Go over the passage again. It's on the insert, and make sure that you fully understand it. Also look at the mark allocation per question. You should be writing approximately double the number of lines as marks allocated. So if it's a 4-mark question, you should be writing approximately 8 lines as your answer. It's a rule of thumb. It's not an exact science, but it certainly does help you. Don't forget the P principle for writing your answers. Make your point, provide evidence, and then explain how that evidence substantiates your point. The summary for question 2 was not that well written, and many of you, for some reason, wrote point form summaries. You are heavily penalized if you do that. So please look at the instructions and follow them to the letter. Your average, the grade average for questions 1 and 2 is 64.9 or 65%, which is where it should be. In matric, your June exam, question 1 and 2 will count as one language test. So if this had been matric next year, I would have been quite pleased with this average. I am less pleased with your answers to the poetry questions. You will see the average for the seen and unseen poetry is 54%. That is not good enough. And it was clear to me from your answers to question 3, the seen poetry, that very few of you had worked through the poems and listened and watched my video lessons on the poems. At the end of each lesson, I ask you to ask me for the model answers, and only a handful of you did that. So that means that the vast majority of the grade 11s are not doing the work at home. And this lack of academic responsibility is going to bite you hard, grade 11s. Your time is rapidly running out to prepare and to get into good habits for matric finals. So come on, get your heads into the game. The unseen poem or poetry was superficially dealt with. Again, that P answering technique needs to be utilized here. Look in detail. You're good enough. You know how to analyze. You know how to annotate poems. You need to do that with question 4, the unseen poetry, as well. I'm sure you'll allow me a brief pity party. Each of those poetry video lessons that I create for you takes approximately 3 full days to create. And how many of you watch them? Not many. I sometimes feel as though the students at other schools in the country are gaining more from my videos than you, my own students, are. And that's heartbreaking. It really is. And it's not just the poetry lessons that you haven't watched. Questions 5 and 6 of paper 1, the general language and textual editing questions, showed me that you didn't do those lessons either. Many of the cartoons, the questions, I took directly from those video lessons. So if you'd watched them, you actually knew the answers. Have a look at that horrific grade average, under 50%. Guys, that's not good enough. And if that's how poorly you do, when you have resources with you, and when I tell you you can look up answers and just write them in a different color for me so that I know what you know and what you don't know, and you get 49% as your average, the alarm bells are ringing loudly in my head. I hope they're ringing in your heads too. In the second lesson of this week, I'd like you to go over all of your answers to paper 2, the literature and transactional writing papers. Please have the IEB rubrics close by so that you can have a look at what is written for each level that I wrote on your answer scripts. Question 1 was unusual in that I asked you a generic question on your independent reading. We did not study the Crucible as we would have, as you know, because we reduced the curriculum because of the lockdown. But you still have to apply the principles of writing literary essays, no matter what the topic. And I gave you a full video lesson on writing a literature essay using The Great Gatsby as the example, but very few of you put into practice the information that was on that video. The structure of your literature essays is all important. Have a look at the rubric. You will see that a large percentage of the description of each level is geared towards the structure, the how of your writing, as opposed to the what of your writing. In the video lesson, I have given you the 5-paragraph template method. It's not cast in stone, so you don't have to do it that way. But if you don't, you'd better have something better to write. So to keep it safe, use that 5-paragraph template. It will guarantee that you'll do relatively well in this section. Many of you did not actually read the question properly and wrote a review of the novel. That's not what was asked. So please go back and look at the wording of the question and look at what you wrote. The idea is not to prove that you read the book. The idea is to be able to engage with character, with plot, with critical thinking. Many of you didn't provide a thesis statement that laid out your argument because you were writing a review. So again, look at what is being asked in the question. Avoid the first person pronoun. A number of you still start with I am going to write about as your opening sentence. That is so amateurish. You're way beyond that now, so please do not do that. You must provide a word count. You are practicing for your matric final exam, and the instructions for your grade 12 paper 2 specify that you must provide a word count for question 1. You don't have to for question 2, but you must get into the habit of doing this for the first question. Grade average 58%, not great, but not that bad either. Of concern to me was the way that you dealt with question 2, the full literary essay on the Great Gatsby. Both questions, 2.1 and 2.2, asked a direct question, but very few of you were able to focus on what was being asked, and you tended to write vaguely about the novel in general. You do a lot of padding, you get sidetracked, you're not focused in your writing. Partly because you don't use a structure, a mind map, a plan to write your essay. Very few of you used relevant quotes. Some of you just sort of randomly took quotes that you'd memorized or found in the novel and shoved them into the essay. They have to add value. They've got to prove your point. They're there in part of that piece structure as evidence to substantiate what your opinion is. We're a very short distance away from the grade 12 literary essay assessments. Your time is running out to get this correct. So grade 11's a 54% average for novel study does not bode well for next year. You've got to put in more practice with the writing of these essays. Your responses to the transactional writing topics in question 3 and question 4 were disappointing. I think one of the reasons is that exam fatigue takes its toll here, and by the time you get to these 2 questions, your hand is cramping, you're tired, and you're rushing to get done. Be careful of that. You're throwing away marks that go a long way to getting you into that next symbol, getting you closer to your goal for English. I was fairly lenient with the way I marked these questions, and even so, your averages are way, way away from the 65% that we aim for the transactional writing. I was concerned that your format was not good. You did not, most of you, know how to write an open letter. So please go over that again. And then in question 3, you had a choice of writing 2 speeches about your independent reading novel. And remember that FLAP acronym that I have taught you. What's the format? What language do you use for the audience, and what's your purpose? F, L, A, and P. Now the first question was a speech to teenagers where you persuade them that the novel is good and worthwhile to read. So that means that your language must be teen appropriate. I don't mean slang, but I mean something that your peers would enjoy listening to. The second one, you had to dissuade teachers from prescribing the novel. And many of you just glossed over the difference between persuade and dissuade and tried to convince teachers that they should teach your IR novel. So by misreading the question like that, you actually cost yourself hugely in marks. I am concerned about those low averages. Also judging by the handwriting on many of your answer scripts, you were just scribbling to get done. Be wary of that, please. Well, the question now is, what are you going to do about this? The marks are not great. They're disappointing, to say the least. But these are not your promotion exams. That comes in, 5-6 weeks' time. Do you have a strategy to improve your position? And what is that strategy? Every one of you will write me a formal letter, please check the format, in which you outline what your strategy is for improving your exam performance in the end of year final examinations. It's a serious letter, it must be mature, it must be realistic. The body of the letter between 200 and 250 words, so exactly the same as it would be in the exams. And the deadline is 5 o'clock this week, Friday, on the 9th of October on Turnitin, so it must be typed. Yes, it's for marks. I'll be using the IEB Transactional Writing rubric for this assessment, and I won't be reminding you of it. So if you don't do it, it will be a 0. Come on, guys. I know that you can all do extremely well in this, and put some real thought into how you are going to improve your exam preparation for the end of the year. That's it for this week's lessons. You know how to get hold of me, my own students, via Edmodo, WhatsApp or email, my school email address. And for anybody else who's watching this, if you would like a soft copy of the grade 11 September exam, the insert and the marking guidelines, you're more than welcome to drop me an email on the address that you see on the screen. And now, grade 11s, over to you.